like to call to order this meeting of the City Council Industrial and Community Development Committee. I am sitting in this evening for Councilor Gould as chair. He's unable to be here this evening. We also have present for the committee Councilors Daigle and Welton. Sitting in for Councilor Gould will be Councilor Melville, and sitting in for Councilor Manning Martin will be Councilor Gamache. We have one item on the agenda, Section 3, the zoning amendment, the MBTA Communities Act. Committee will recall we last met on this on October 10th. Community Development, under the leadership of Mr. Bellavance, took a number of points of feedback, and here to present again this evening is the Director of Community Development, Mr. Bellavance.
Good evening, subcommittee and city council members. Kurt Bellavance, Director of Planning and Community Development. I was before the committee a few weeks ago to talk about the new state requirement, Section 3A of Mass General Law 40A, otherwise called the MBTA, multifamily zoning. There was some positive feedback that I received that evening. Went back, we got our consultant back involved, looking at some new modeling in regards to the some possible identifying some possible other properties, and then I'll show those to you and discuss how that went, and hopefully we can answer some questions after that. So as shown on the screen, we took a look originally at mapping throughout the city. There were various locations that we looked at. We put some analysis in. There's a modeling that the state has that we need to follow. We had hired RKG consultant to do that for us. They were certified by the state.
Mr. Bellavance, excuse me for a moment. Some of this, I think, is covered in 8B. So I'd like to get a motion to receive item 8B from the regular meeting package.
So moved.
Councilors, heard the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? It's a vote.
Thank you. We took a look at the, again, different areas. We worked with our consultant to put together the modeling, and then drafted some zoning language. And then also there was some question in regards to grants, so we put that information in there as well. So these are the areas that we originally started to look at in regards to our modeling. We identified mostly multifamily sites already throughout the city. There were a few that were undeveloped. One was brought to you at the last meeting, which is on Dearborn Road, several acres owned by Northeast Nursery. Another piece was Salem Country Club as an open area available to at a large scale site. One of the reasons we ended up dropping the Salem Country Club off was the part of the requirements is that you need to zone specific parcels. You can't break parcels up. So we would have had to zone the entire Salem Country Club, 360 acres for multifamily. And it would have been a low density, but it would have spread out multifamily housing on a large location of really undeveloped property in the city. So we kept that in the back of our mind, but we wanted to explore some other options in regards to that. So what we did was we took all of those parcels, we worked with our consultant RKG to put together modeling. You're not going to be able to read this, but we figured out which zoning districts each one were in, how did they comply with the changes that we needed to make, which ones were a lot of changes, which ones were the least amount of changes. The one that popped up the most was, again, Dearborn Road, which was presented at the last meeting. Once we had that modeling in place and what we could do, we worked with our consultant in working on drafting the zoning in regards to that. Again, this is a consultant that has worked with other communities as well and has had their zoning passed at the state level. We thought that would be a positive effect for us. We wanted to make sure that we were doing everything the correct way. I didn't want any changes as if we voted on this and sent it to the state and having to come back again. So once we drafted that zoning, we started to look and fine-tune that into different locations throughout the city. Again, we're showing on this the Dearborn Road project that seemed to be checking all the boxes in regards to this. Basically, we looked at how we could create the number of units in these locations. So it came down to what are the minimum lot sizes, what's the frontage, the setbacks, what's the height, what's the FAR, parking, landscaping, all those requirements that we would have in all of our zoning, and we applied those. How would we be able to accomplish getting all the units that we wanted to get in? On this case, this shows the Dearborn. It also shows Terrace Estates. We looked at Terrace Estates as it's already a largely developed multifamily over near the mall. So that was one of the models that we had plugged in. We continued to look at other sites. Again, we liked the Dearborn site, so we took a look at Cranebrook, which is off of 114. It's accessible through Danvers. That was appealing. We thought if there's any traffic that came from this, then it would lead to Danvers in 114, which wasn't that bad. Instead of being, again, developed in an area that's already heavily congested on the Peabody side. Again, we plugged the numbers in regards to our modeling to see what would the impacts be. Right, and as an example for this case, the maximum density for the Dearborn was, again, 45 units per acre, and the 114, we saw a slight decline in that. That was about 28 units per acre. And that's keeping in all the other variables, the 6 stories, 72 feet height in regards to that. We continued to look at other spots. We took a look at Brooksby Village. Brooksby Village has 1,572 units. That's a large amount of units of multifamily already developed. It's 6 stories with the buildings. It's accessible going through Danvers. It looked like a good spot that we could zone our multifamily. When we plugged in the parameters, it brought down the maximum density at Dearborn down to 20. So that was a huge drop from 45 units per acre down to 20. And then Brooksby was about 18 units per acre. So we thought now we're getting a little bit closer to what would be more responsible for the city. And then finally, what we did was we said, would it still work if we took out Joel, which is the North American headquarters for Japanese microscope company. We took that out. We said, why not give them any incentive to develop? We'll take that piece out. And really the only difference was the density at Dearborn had gone up slightly, but the 18 unit per acre at Brooksby remained the same. The next step that we looked at was, okay, now that we have this, it seems to work pretty positively. Can we lower the height? So we went back to the consultant and asked them if we could plug that into the model as well. So we went down from 6 stories to 4 stories. So we dropped that off as well. So it ended up being even more positive on this for this location. So I had submitted the additional changed language to the City Council last week, which is, I believe you just accepted. The language, and I want to highlight the major differences for those. The original one had 1 district. We're taking the approach of having 2 districts so we can modify the different parcels that would fit our needs. We replaced the undeveloped land that we were looking at, which was mostly Dearborn Road and Northeast Nursery. And again, looking at Salem Country Club a ways back, and really replace that with fully developed multifamily neighborhoods or multi-name parcels. Then we ended up, the major was we decreased. So the density for both of those was 45 units per acre. We brought that down to 23 and 18, which is a lot less dense. Then we were able to reduce the height from 72 feet down to 55 feet, 4 stories. And then when we were looking at the undeveloped sites, for example, at my last appearance before the committee, the Northeast Nursery, we were looking at roughly 1,700 new developable units. In the case that with Brooksby and using the Dearborn, we're down to 138 units. So that would be 58 new units would have potential at Brooksby and 80 units potentially at Dearborn. So looking at those two sites, it's not likely, but it may be feasible depending on some creative engineering that they may be able to get that. But again, it would be maybe an additional smaller building on each site compared to the Dearborn Northeast Nursery site, which would have had 4 to 5 6-story buildings. So that's where we are this evening. I wanted to also touch on some of the grants. I put together a list of just the last 10 years that we've been through community development, what grants we've gotten from the state. There's roughly, through their programs that they identified as part of their guidelines. We didn't look at other grants that we receive. There are other ones that we do, but we just included the ones that were highlighted in the MBTA guidelines. And that's roughly $9.6 million over the last 10 years, and that led to an additional $6 million in other grants. So usually if you get a grant and that's successful, it helps you get another grant, whether it was state or federal or local. And then I listed in the block below that other grants that we're in process of looking at. So we typically identify grants in the next 12 to 18 months. We know the grant cycles, so those would be additional grants that we'd be applying for over the next roughly the year and a half. And then lastly, the state released the information in regards to the new economic bond bill. It has not passed yet, but it's moving through the system and is hopefully going to pass. They identified additional $400 million for MassWorks, $100 million for local economic development grants, $30 million for brownfields development, and $9.5 million for downtown vitality. All of the typical grants that our office would apply for. So before you, I provided the updated zoning language. I'd be happy to go through that and identify. I've worked with a couple of the counselors to help go through this, pick out some, listen to their recommendations, their suggestions. Thank you for that. And we were able to edit some of that language to have a product I think that would pass at the state and would be the least impact on the city of Peabody. So I'm happy to do that now if you would like.
There's some differences in the present from what we saw in the presentation to what we had in 8A. So if I could also get a motion to receive the presentation.
So moved.
You heard the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? It's a vote. Mr. Bellavance, if you could make sure the clerk gets a copy of that presentation after this evening. Questions from the committee? I guess Mr. Mayor would like to make some comments. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Q. Good evening, councilors. Hope everybody's doing well. I know Mr. Bellavance kind of ran through the slideshow presentation, gave you some information on density and height restrictions and different modeling, which is all very important and very relevant to the MBTA Communities Act. But really what this comes down to, and cutting to the heart of it, is looking at this as a demand of the state that I believe has to be met. Again, I mentioned this at the last meeting we had. This would not be something that we would be bringing forward. My office, Community Development, certainly I don't think it'd be something that the City Council would be bringing forward. But this is a reality that's been put on us, and I know other cities and towns are really struggling with it and hashing it over and having some real spirited debate on this. And but when I looked at it, it really came down to, okay, how do we comply, meet the regulations that have been imposed upon us by the state, but still make sure we're maintaining the integrity of our community, integrity of our neighborhoods. I want to commend Mr. Bellavance and his team. They've spent significant amount of hours with a consultant looking at different options. I wanted to thank Councilor Peach, Councilor McGinn, and some others who have weighed in. But this has really been a team effort to bring this forward to you today. It's probably been one of the major issues that we've been working on over the last few weeks. And bringing this forward today, we looked at dozens of options to try to see what would fit. And initially I was thinking doing undeveloped land in some specific location. But I think it was Councilor Gamache mentioned at the last meeting that could open up some concerns about large projects. And I completely, as I looked more into this, agreed with it. And what we thought was, okay, let's look at really the developed lands already in the city, the developed properties, and see where we could utilize those developed properties, adding to it, using that acreage to meet our requirement, but then that wouldn't add as many units to it. And the proposal that we're moving forward with today, which I'm hopeful that we can move forward with, and I urge the councilors hopefully to support it tonight so we can move forward, is the option number 4, in which we're utilizing Brooksby Village, which, as all of you know, is beautifully developed property. At best, they would be able to add 58 units to it, which would not be certainly a significant amount over there. And if they wanted to build another building, that's certainly something I do not think impacts the city of Peabody, our neighborhoods, or our residents, and all of the infrastructure and the needs that we have as a community. The other one is Dearborn, and we're looking at 80 units over in Dearborn. At that location, again, that would be difficult lift for those properties in order to develop. They would have to tear down potentially what they already have to add some new units to it. It would be a heavy lift. And at best, if they wanted to make that investment, they would be adding 80 units. Again, something that I do not think impacts the integrity of our community, our neighborhoods, and our residents, and doesn't impact our infrastructure as much as some other possibilities could be. Adding 138 units to our numbers certainly, I think, is something that the city can handle and work with, as opposed to other potential. We looked at Salem Country Club. We looked at other properties where we wondered if there could be much development. But the risks and the potential risks were a little higher than I certainly felt comfortable with moving forward. But again, I know this is something that a number of you, and rightly so, have criticized and haven't felt good about and haven't felt comfortable with, and I understand it completely, and a big part of me feels the same way. But I am really concerned about the opportunities for grants that we could be missing out. And Mr. Bellavance laid out the significant millions of dollars that we received through grants that we would not potentially be eligible for. And I read with interest, and some of you may have, there was an article in the Salem News just last week on November 6th, and it was officials from the city of Middleton potentially losing $2 million state grant for Route 114 project. And I just want to read a couple of the paragraphs because it really drives home the point that this is something that I really worried about as time has gone on here. The town was recently approved for a $2 million grant from the MassWorks Infrastructure Program, and that's a program we've taken significant advantage of over the years, which was our whole redesign of Main Street and Peabody Square. The grant was to support traffic and safety improvements at the intersections of Route 114 and Route 62, where traffic volume is more than twice its capacity. However, it stands to lose such funding if it doesn't come into compliance with the MBTA Communities Act by December 31st, after Middleton residents voted down adoption of a compliant overlay district at town meeting in May, town officials said. And it's a pretty lengthy article. I certainly can share that with anybody and make copies of it. But it was in the newspaper last week, and I think that's just one example of many cities and towns that are jeopardizing potential grant opportunities by not complying with this. So I believe that this is, looking at it in a global point of view, is the best option we have in order to move forward. Again, where even if these property owners, Brooksby Village and the Dearborn properties, wanted to take advantage of the MBTA Communities Act, it would take a significant investment for them in order to bring forth, again, 58 more units at Brooksby Village when there's already almost 2,000 there. And then at Dearborn, where there's, how many at Dearborn currently? 446 to add on about 80. It would take a significant investment in order to make that happen. And I think those two particular areas are, I believe, risks that we can take in order to move forward, where, again, we're not jeopardizing the integrity of.
Also with those, they're not in compliance for affordable housing now. If they did, then they would be compliant. They would have to be compliant with affordable housing.
Right. So I strongly believe this is the right course of action. Again, not ideal where I want to be right now, presenting this to all of you. But again, as I've said, I think this is the best option we have, and it is not the impact that a lot of the other options could be, and it does not impact our ability to continue to apply for and receive critical grants that we need. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, throughout the course of the night, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak and give my perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Bellavance, just could you, I mean, I know we're aware of the deadlines, but can you just reiterate the deadlines so, just so that we understand the discussion and what the timeline would look like?
Yes, the deadline would be December 31st this year, so about 6 weeks.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chairman, to the clerk, we would have to draft and advertise a hearing at some point between now and when?
It would be a good idea to draft and advertise tonight so that it could be adopted at the last regular meeting of the year.
And so, okay, so to the last regular, so tonight would be the requirement to get something so we get in the last meeting of the year. I just want to make sure everybody's understands kind of the timeline.
Yeah, the timeline, excuse me, the timeline we're looking at is the planning board has their first meeting the beginning of December. I think it's the 5th. So we have time enough to advertise for that, and then that would also leave time to advertise for the city council as well. So we'd be able to get the meetings and the necessary meetings in under a tight schedule right now.
Thank you. And I just, I appreciate that. I just think it would help with the discussion this evening to understand that the planning board and the due date for this. And I appreciate the work that was done to ensure that we are going to be in compliance while minimizing impact. I think that was the goal from the onset, and I appreciate the hard work that went into it to ensure that. And like many of my colleagues, I'm sure, I don't want to be in a situation where any grant money would either be delayed or we might miss out on from other communities that might be in compliance or communities that aren't required to be in compliance. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Just to follow up with Councilor Melville's, we did receive a grant a few weeks back from Mass Development for $65,000 to look at Centennial Park. There was a caveat in that letter that said if you're not in compliance, then you can't have this grant. So they're dangling the carrot in front of us already.
Thank you, Councilor Melville. Councilor Daigle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and Councilor Peach for putting all of this effort in, along with Kurt Bellavance. You really cleaned this up in a short amount of time, and I think you produced everything that we were looking for at the last meeting. This map is extremely helpful to give an overview of everything, and it also illustrates that properties across the city were considered. It wasn't just one area or one ward, so you guys really did a great job at looking at everything. So I appreciate that, thank you. My only question, and I'm sorry if this has been answered in the past, this will be advertised. Would the property owners be notified directly if we decide to move ahead and make a selection? And I don't know if that's to the chairman or to Mr. Bellavance.
It's not required, but that's something certainly we could do.
Thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't want to blindside them that they didn't know about this and they reach out to us after the fact. So that's my only concern. Otherwise, I lean to support this, but I'm open to hearing what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Daigle. Councilor Wellen.
Thank you, Chairman McGinn. Again, just to echo the comments that I made so far, Thank you to Mr. Bellavance for putting this together. Can you just reiterate, because I want to make sure I have the numbers right, and it's a pretty profound difference. With option 4, we're talking 180 units thereabout, as opposed to potentially 138 as opposed to possibly 1,800. Can you just clarify that, please?
Sure. Originally, when we were looking at, or at least the last presentation, we were before this committee, we were looking at undeveloped land, which basically allowed all new housing to be developed with, empty land. So right now, we're looking at property that already has multifamily housing on it. So it's not necessary, as the mayor spoke. It's highly unlikely that they're going to knock building down and rebuild when they're probably earning from their investment currently, and it wouldn't make sense fiscally to do that. So we went from approximately 1,700 brand-new units on vacant lots to roughly 138 on 2 parcels that already contain several hundred units.
Great, thank you for clarifying, and I really just kind of wanted to underscore that point that, obviously that's a significant reduction in housing, and I think we've all spoken that we're not in favor of how this has come about, but I think the response that you've put together is a very good one. So I plan on supporting this. I just also had another clarifying question. I know there's stipulations in terms of affordable housing, but we can't, with these new parcels, we can't suggest that they be utilized either through age restriction or set aside for certain populations, whether it be individuals with disabilities or returning veterans or anything like that. That's out of our hands, correct?
Correct. There are certain requirements when they list it as an allowed multifamily housing. They're really looking for market rate housing. They're not promoting affordable housing or any other type of housing except for market rate. They do allow you up to 10% of affordable housing, which we did put that in our language. Anything additional, actually between 10 plus up to 20%, would have to do an economic feasibility study that the state would require us to do and actually give us the consultant to do that. Then that tended to lean towards more units that we'd have to produce so that these potential developer would break even. So we just kept it at 10%. That seemed to be the approach that our consultant has already had approved at the state. So we decided to put that in. And then also the 2 lots, for example, the 7 Dearborn wouldn't be able to add any additional lots because they would be already at capacity. So it would be the Highlands and Brooksby. Neither one of those are affordable right now. So the DDD residential overlay would go away and it would be replaced by the new multifamily overlay district. That would require the 10%. So if Dearborn decided to move forward, they would have to comply with the affordable housing piece of that. And then Brooksby, again, is not an affordable, so any additional thing would have to fall under the requirement of affordable housing.
Thank you. And last question, or last point of clarification. Can you just remind us what a friendly 40B with the city, the percentage of affordable housing we would consider? So 10% for these projects, but a 40B or a friendly 40B would require how much in terms of affordable housing to be built?
Typically, we look at about 25%.
And the reason I was asking is to clarify your point, these are not affordable housing. This isn't an effort to provide affordable housing for the Commonwealth. It's an effort to provide more units at market rate.
Correct.
Thanks. All set. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Welton. Councilor Rossignol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Bellavance, if we added the 58 units at Brooksby, would Brooksby then have to comply with 10% of all of their housing?
Not 100% sure that they would have to. It would depend on several factors and how they develop that and where they develop that on their site. The underlying zoning is in place. We're creating this overlay. What I was told was they can't pick and choose. They can't say, well, we're going to have part of our project in this zone and part of that project. They would have to. So it's unlikely that they would want to develop that and really test the waters, I guess.
So basically, our response to their question would be, if you build it, 10% of all your units would be affordable.
I would start off with that, yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Bellavance, how much time did you spend on this monstrosity?
Well, we've been working on it for at least a year and a half. There's been webinars, probably a couple hundred hours, maybe. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, this actually started in 2020, correct?
It could have been, yeah. It's at least a few years.
So 4 years and over, to your estimation, over 100 hours of something that not one person here wants. And the only reason why we're doing this is because the state, in their infinite wisdom, is holding back funds that are needed for each city. To that point, and I am so mad right now, it is scary. So they're withholding funds for Milton to build a seawall for safety because they didn't comply with this zoning. They're withholding funds to Middleton for traffic and for safety because they won't build a 4-story building. That, to me, is unconscionable. It's literally ludicrous. So, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your hours, and I appreciate your hard work for doing this. I really do, because it was a lot of hours, and there's a million other things that you could be doing, spending your time, that would be way more productive than this nonsense. The fact that we're sitting here is literally so that the state doesn't slap our wrist and not give us money that we rightly need for our citizens. We have done everything in our power to produce housing. Our roadways show it. Route 95 is a parking lot. 93 is a parking lot. Route 1 is a parking lot. Nowhere in this bill, in this law, does it address infrastructure whatsoever. So build 4 units, 4 stories of units all over your city, wherever you live, but roadways don't matter. The MBTA doesn't really matter because there's no infrastructure built into that. Nowhere in this does it include infrastructure, does it include roadways, does it include how people, us, are going to get around and how that's going to impact the community. We're lucky, believe it or not, that it's going to impact us less than it could. The original plan was 1,700 units. That's massive. And through your hard work, and I applaud you, it's now down to 138. But the fact that we're sitting here and that we have to do this, otherwise we lose millions of dollars in needed funding, not just because we're like, what do we want to do today? No, this is public safety money we'd lose out on. This is infrastructure for roadways we'd lose money we'd lose out on. Central Street, flood mitigation, you name it, the state would say, nah, you didn't build your 400 units, so no, we're not giving you a dime. It's just folly. It's foolery. I don't understand the state's need for mass quantities of housing, and it only affects basically the east coast of Massachusetts. Somewhere in here should be, where it's an MBTA bill, how about increasing your MBTA to Western Mass where there's actually places to build? Just called common sense, I think, but I digress. I will not be supporting this because I do not think it's right. I understand we're going to lose millions of dollars in fund, and that's not on me. That is on the state and their infinite wisdom to actually pass this pile of hooey. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rossignol. Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really the only question I had was answered about the affordability requirements by Councilor Walton and Councilor Rossignol. So I'll just say that, I agree option 4 is probably the best option for me. Additionally, thank you very much. This is much more palatable than what was given to us 2 weeks ago, and I think it's manageable. And in truth, highly unlikely that'll even happen, which I guess, made us run through hoops for several years for no reason. But anyway, thank you very much to you and your staff for getting this done. It's great.
Thank you, Councilor Turco. Any other councilors? Seeing none. Mr. Bellavance, there are a few things that you, speaker noted in your presentation that aren't in the draft that we received tonight. I think there's an appetite to advance this, perhaps, but I'd like to see if we can incorporate the edits now so that if we advance it with the language that's agreeable to the committee. The first would be in the very first definition. I think this, in some small way, addresses some of the passionate comments of Councilor Rossignol. While he may be the most passionate on the topic, I think there is kind of a general feeling from what I've observed that we're doing this for one reason and one reason only, and that's to comply with the law because of the risk associated with losing the funding. So we have, in two places in here, we have to say, and to encourage the production of a variety of housing sizes and types to provide equal access to new housing for people with a variety of needs and income levels. My suggestion was to strike that in both places and simply say that the reason for doing this is to comply with the requirements of Section 3A of the Zoning Act of the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A. I know when you and I discussed this, I used the word fluff, and you seemed to be in agreement that that was a proper way to categorize that language, and that it could come out without being harmful to the document passing the scrutiny at the state level. So I'd like to suggest making that change.
Yes.
Would you be comfortable
I
with
agree
that?
with that, yes.
Mr. Chairman, can you point out the sections, please?
Yep, so on the very first page, we're talking about Section 3.2.15, which is a definition. Are you with me, Councilor Turco? Yep, so just to include the first portion of that, which is to say, to comply with the requirements of Section 3A of the Zoning Act of Massachusetts General Law 40A, period. And then it's the exact same edit in 6.17.1, that the purpose of the section is to comply with the law. That is why we are doing this, from my perspective. Mr. Belvance, could you just, without getting too deep into the weeds here, if any councilor was to pull a property record card and look at the number of acres here, they're going to see a slight difference between what's on the property record card versus what is indicated in the language of this ordinance, which I believe is a state GIS number versus the net numbers which are here. I think it's important for councilors to understand why there's three different acreage numbers there. So could you spend just a moment explaining that?
Sure. So the model that all the communities are basing the compliance on, they use that, and it's based on the Mass GIS parcel data information. So they don't look at anything that the city has, any of our information or property cards. So they use that, so it's a baseline for the entire MBTA district that they're doing that. So there are slight differences between the acreage in regards to Brooksby Village, much more minor for the Dearborn Road area. But as they put that together, they also look at several criteria to come up with the net area, excuse me, the rights of way, waterways, public right-of-ways that go through the property, easements, things like that. That is all part of the modeling. So what they do is they produce a net area. So when we submit this, I have to submit the model that they produced as part of the application process to the state. That'll be all identified in a model that every community must use. So there's some different numbers in that based on that model system that they use. And so the numbers that we come up with, really, they want to know, can you build the units in the net area? And when I talked to the consultant about that, they said it's more for larger areas that are like a swamp or a pond, where they say, yeah, we'll zone that. We know nothing can be built there. So that's really to reduce that information, really produce a net area that can actually be built upon. So that's why those numbers are shown that way, but it's based on the model that all the communities have to use.
Thank you for that explanation. So no change there, just some context. The next one is...
I think that there was a change, and I'm not sure if you have that copy. The only thing I changed was the districts. So because the whole modeling that they've been using for the last year, the Dearborn was always District 1, and then the ones we always played with were District 2. So I think one of the versions I had was the Dearborn was District 2. So those were just swapped to identify, but I'm not sure which copy.
Okay, so we're going to, for the purpose... So the way it should be reflected is the two Dearborn properties are Sub-District 1 and Brooksby Village is Sub-District 2,
Correct.
Okay, so let's let the record reflect that should be in the kind of, I guess we're going to refer to this collectively as the as modified version, okay? So that's how it should appear in the as modified version. I'm also not sure in the as modified version in 6.17.2. What is the, Councilor Turco, do you have that available? What does it say, the first line? The MFOD is an overlay district with land area of approximately, what's the number that you have for the number of acres?
87, Mr. Chairman, point of information, it's 87 on the...
Yeah, so it should read 121.3.
Yes.
Yep, so
Correct.
that the as modified version, I want to make sure you capture that.
Just to clarify, what we included in the I and CD was the previous information, so there was additional information sent to the council that was received earlier, but that's on the full council meeting tonight, that information. So I think what some folks are looking at is the one from the original submission.
So I'm looking at 8B, which we did bring into this proceeding tonight, and it reflects 87 acres, so that's wrong. So we want that to read 121.3. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So let's just make sure, Mr. Bellavance, that you capture that. The next one is 6.17.2, subsection B. There's a reference to the underlying zoning, and it references the DDD and R3 in two places. R3 is a bogus reference that must have been left in there from a version that, so that the proper zoning district for Brooksby Village is BR. So you agree, Mr. Bellavance?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So the as modified version would include excuse me. The as modified version would include two references to the BR, and we would strike the two references to the R3. again, Mr. Belvance, this is more of a, explanation that I'd like you to provide to the council. It's not so much an edit. I was disappointed that we had to introduce all this separate affordability language because our zoning ordinance contains affordability language, so I thought it's confusing to do this. But as I understand it, the consultants brought this forward because they thought it would hold up in a stronger fashion to any Attorney General scrutiny. And I just want to make sure I have a correct understanding as to why we feel we need to duplicate language here.
Yes, that's correct. And since we are adding the affordable piece to that, they wanted that to be sort of self-contained within the specific ordinance language so that any reference to the affordability would be basically contained within this language in this section of the zoning.
Thank you. I have similar concerns about how we bring in bits and pieces of the site plan review, but that's to a lesser extent. That appears to stay more intact. Another typo, I'm in section 617.4, subsection B. There's a reference in that section to 617.4A. I'm sorry, 4.1. It should be A1, making reference directly to the paragraph directly above it. Do you agree with that, Mr. Belvance?
Yes.
So the as-modified version would make that correction as well. In the original version, I'm now in the dimensional standards, 617.5. In the original version, there was a setback requirement of 100 feet from Route 1 and from residential abutters, which went away, and I brought that to your attention. You seem to believe we could put that back in, although the Route 1 reference may no longer make any sense, but the residential abutter reference would still make sense, given the parcels that were ultimately chosen.
Yeah, just as a clarification for that, that was a part of the ordinance originally as part of the DDD overlay. So I did look at the two parcels. It doesn't change anything about the Dearborn, but in regards to the Brooksby Village, there are two spots on the Brooksby property that would slightly be closer to within 100 feet. One, it would be about a parking lot, and another one would put another existing multifamily residential. So it's, if the committee wishes to put that in, we could put that in. I don't think if it's necessary, but if we leave it out, either way, but I don't think it makes much of a difference.
I'd like to see it back in there. I'd like to get rid of the Route 1 reference, because that really doesn't make much sense. But I think as it was in there originally with respect to other residential abutters, I'd like to see that back in there. And I'm going to ask for a vote of the committee on all of this stuff collectively, so if anybody has an opinion on that they'd like to share, please, you could do it as we're going along here, or do it when we look at this collectively at the end of the process. But for the purposes of what we're doing right now, I'd like to see that back in there, as I just mentioned. You agree?
Yep, that's fine. Yep.
In that same table, the version we have, the most recent version we have, still indicates a maximum height of 72 feet, 6 stories, but your presentation was clear that we could now bring that down to 4 stories, 55 feet. So that you'll make that modification as well.
Yes, that would just, they were running modeling earlier today, so
No,
came up with that.
I know this is, please don't take any of this as a criticism.
Not at all.
This is something that I had brought to your attention, and I appreciate that you were able to get that process through the consultants rapidly there and get us a definitive answer. I'm now in section 617.6, off-street parking. In section A, it's, the version we have says that the number of parking spaces, it will be a maximum of 1.75 parking spaces, which implies that there is no minimum. So as written, because we've taken, we've specifically taken 9.2 out of the equation, there isn't a minimum anywhere, so, you know, conceivably a proposal could come forward with 0 parking, which obviously doesn't make any sense. So I believe this is another one that you put to the consultant, and they came back with a recommendation of putting a minimum of 1.5 and a maximum of 1.75. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'd like to request that that language be added there as well. 617.7, really, again, just speaker noting here, I would like to have been able to put these side by side with the criteria that was in the residential overlay, the 6.16 that we spent a lot of time on. It's really hard to do that. So it's not 100% clear to me that what's been gained and lost between those two, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to get hung up on that. Again, I just hate to see two sections of zoning that have potentially different criteria, so that when now something gets to site plan review and they've got project A over here under one overlay and project B over here on a different overlay, and they've got two different sets of criteria they need to evaluate it against, it's confusing. You know, it would be great if there was one set of criteria, primarily for the benefit of the planning board. But again, I think to some extent they looked at, the consultant looked at 6.16 as, and at least drew on that at some level. I can see some parallels, but I can't, again, it's just not like in the same order or the same format, so it's just hard to do a side-by-side comparison.
Yeah, we did. We asked them to look at the residential overlay because we had put some design features in that, and that's what we wanted to do the same thing in regards to this. So, but like you said, Councilor, I can't say exactly what things were the same.
And it's come up, the affordability section, it's come up in a number of the questions asked by councilors. So, I mean, this language, we believe it's going to pass scrutiny, and we do not need to add any incentives, correct? We don't need to, elsewhere in zoning, we need to add incentives to kind of sweeten the pot for compliance with inclusionary zoning, but that's not necessary here, correct?
Correct. That would then go into that next bracket of having to do the economic feasibility study and additional information and possibly showing what more units would look like. So we left that out.
Okay, and then the last section, I'm in site plan review, We've drawn in much of the site plan language, but not all of it. And one of the sections that's missing is 12.18, which is the fee schedule. So I brought that to your attention, and you had indicated that would need to be added back in, that these were not going to be exempt from any of the fees.
Absolutely not. We'll bring that in, and we've been actually collecting some good fees in that. And I always like to use the example, the Amazon project that came before us. They paid a fee of $100, and it spent hours and hours and hours of many city officials' time, and it was $100 was the fee. So we've changed that since, and I believe last year we brought in close to $20,000. So we want to do the same with this.
So will that be a simple reference to the existing language, 12.18, or?
Yes, we'll do that. Then in the future, if we end up changing the fees, it'll already reference that in here.
Great. Okay. So again, those are what I noted in terms of what I observed in your presentation and some of the other discussions we had. I wanted to make sure that was all fully transparent to the committee. I would refer to that collectively as the as modified version of what we have before us. And I'd entertain a motion to accept those changes as an as modified version of the proposed language.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Councilors, you heard the motion. On the motion, seeing none, roll call.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Melville,
Yes.
Gamache,
Yes.
Daigle,
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Belvance, I just want to add my thanks to the words that you heard from several other councilors. I know you put in a tremendous amount of work on this, and quite a bit, substantial amount of effort since our last meeting to try to get us to a better place here. And I particularly appreciate how attentive you were to the council and how receptive you are to the many ideas. I think it really helped move this along. I agree with what Councilor Turco said. Option 4, I think, is by far and away the best alternative here. It's based on a much more reasonable density. When this came up at the first meeting, we were talking about 45 units per acre. That really caught my attention. And now we're closer to the 20 units per acre overall. In fact, I think effectively across both sub-districts, we're at just under 20, 19.7. I'm sorry, the 19.7 is a value of what I calculate the current density is of the units that are there now. So for the 2,198 units that are there now, that's a density of about 19.7 units per acre. And this proposal is 20.93. So it's pretty darn close. I just think that makes a lot more sense than what was originally proposed. And I know that it took a lot of work to get there, looking at the various parcels that were available in the modeling, and that's complicated by a lot of these rules that are thrown into the guidelines about not being able to split lots and not being, no sub-district can be, that one of them has to be greater than 50%, and so it seemed like everywhere you turned, there was a gotcha. And so navigating that, I know, was difficult, but I think we're in a much better place. This 138 unit difference between what the potential is and what we might have been looking at under the original proposal. I mean, that's very substantial. And I just, when I look at Brooksby Village, I love the development, but it really did cause some problems for Peabody historically. I mean, that development was built just prior to inclusionary zoning. Councilor Gamache might have a better perspective on this than me because it was before my time. But, all those units coming on with 0 affordable units really is what put us upside down on our 10% objective on the SHI. So I really like the idea of being able to use Brooksby Village here to our advantage on another state mandate to finally get some benefit out of that development with respect to this law versus how it kind of worked against us on 40B. I think there's kind of some ironic justice in that, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. I really believe that Peabody has been doing more than its fair share, actually, for housing production for decades, and as compared to what's been going on in other communities. And I think finding a way to do it this way, to take advantage of areas that are already densely residentially developed and have that get us into compliance is evidence of that belief that we have been doing our part. So other communities are taking the same approach. I think Beverly, for example, I read an article about them recently. It was kind of a non-issue ultimately for them to vote on it because same thing. It was the potential of units ultimately being produced under their revised ordinance was going to be minimal, which is very similar to the situation we have here. So I do plan to support this as modified. With that, I would be looking for a motion for a favorable recommendation to the full council on the proposal, option 4 as modified.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
You heard the motion from Councilor Melville. On the motion, seeing none, roll call.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Melville,
Yes.
Gamache.
Yes.
Daigle,
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
I would look for a motion to recommend that the council send the proposal for option 4 as modified to the planning board. So moved. I'd take that motion.
So moved.
You heard the motion from Councilor Gamache. On the motion, seeing none, roll call.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Melville,
Yes.
Gamache.
Yes.
Daigle,
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
I would entertain a motion that the committee recommend to the full council that this be drafted and advertised for a city council public hearing on the matter.
So moved.
You heard the motion from Councilor Gamache. On the motion, seeing none, roll call.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Melville,
Yes.
Gamache.
Yes.
Daigle.
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Councilors, because This falls under, 40A, Section 5, the process for changing zoning, which has been subject to change for certain housing proposals. So our practice on these types of proposals has been to get a opinion from the city solicitor on the voting threshold required. So if you're in agreement with that, I would accept the motion to recommend to the full council that we request an opinion from the city solicitor on the city council vote threshold on this matter.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would just make that, if we could add that, that would be that we would have that well before the actual meeting that we have in December. I would make a request to the mayor if he could make that happen. Thank you. And I'd make that motion.
Councilors, you heard the motion from Councilor Melville on the motion. Seeing none, roll call.
Councilors Welton,
Yes.
Melville,
Yes.
Gamache.
Yes.
Daigle.
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Yep. So thank you, Councilors. Just double checking with the clerk that we've got everything covered, and I believe she's smiling. We do. Is there anything else on this matter? Yep, Mr. Bellavance?
I just want to make a last comment that I'm glad we had an extra week because of the holiday, so it gave us a little bit more time to work with our consultant in running several models. And I also want to thank, I spoke with at least 5 city council members, and I think this was a good effort put forward. The feedback we received at the last meeting was great, and I think we were able to put together an excellent product that I think will be a good for the city. It'll allow my office to keep functioning with the many grants that we receive, so we look forward to that as well, and hopefully the state accepts what we send them. So thank you again for the city council for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bellavance. Great job. Mr. Mayor? Good. Anything else on this? If not, I'd take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Heard the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? It's a vote. We are adjourned.